Good day, everyone. Greetings out there. Greetings and welcome to the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change's digital platform, webinar, Sport Conversations for Change. I'm Dr. Keila Carter-Francique, coming to you live from San Jose State University. I'm kind of winded today doing those mommy things, but I think a lot of it speaks to even the topic of the day regarding equitable futures for women in sport. So before I get into today's conversation, I want us to really think about this month, what it's been, this time period, what it's been, as we sort of consider women in sport in our discussion today. I welcome you to, again, join the conversation. Follow SJSU on our web platform at sjsuwordstoaction.com, at our Facebook platform, facebook.com/SJSU Words to Action, Twitter at SJSU Words Action, no two, and our Instagram at Words to Action SJSU. Again, if you're going to follow us, when you do follow us, please use the hashtag SJSU Words to Action. Whew, I think I caught my breath doing mommy things. So today's conversation is entitled Equitable Futures for Women in Sport. Before we start this 2021 Women's History Month panel, we at the Institute invite you to view our past Sport Conversations for Change to include our most recent edition, special edition, Sport Conversation for Change webinar entitled Feeling Good, Celebrating National Girls and Women in Sports Day Through a Wall of Song. In this particular program, I am so proud and so happy because we partnered with San Jose Museum of Art, San Jose Jazz, and the Wall of Song project with artist Mel Day, one of our very own Mel Day here at San Jose State University. This episode can be viewed in full on our ISSC YouTube channel with amazing guest panelist, Dr. Amy August, who's joining us today as my co-moderator. Come on screen. And as well as some amazing faculty members, staff members at San Jose State University, to include Dr. Tamar Samerjian, who was the chair of the Department of Kinesiology and also the faculty athletic rep for SJSU, Bonnie Sugiyama, director of the Pride Center and Gender Equity Center, and Dr. Jalila Burrell, an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies. We also had a moment to share and celebrate some amazing young scholars, young women, young student athletes here at SJSU and their respective sport teams, as well as coaches, faculty, and staff that have been doing amazing things to promote social justice and social change using their platform. In this particular program, last but not least, we also have the amazing soprano, Danielle Marie, that shares a little call and response as we talk about Wall of Song project, in particular, the song Feeling Good. And I'm so grateful we have an amazing interview with Letticy, 13-time Grammy nominee Letticy, sharing her perspective on Nina Simone, on jazz, and on the significance of girls and women in sport. So as some of you know, some of you may not know, the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change is dedicated to research analysis and education. It started in 2017 as the brainchild of Dr. Harry Edwards, and is an opportunity to continue the legacy of equity and social justice that is a part of San Jose State's DNA. So let's get into today's conversation. We've got some amazing panelists that I want to share out with you. But as we think about today's conversation, when we talk about this particular month, we want to definitely celebrate all things women with Women's History Month, and also serve as an opportunity for reflection on International Women's Day, National Girls and Women in Sports Day. As our statement, our announcement said, women have and continue to make tremendous contributions in sport as participants, as leaders, as influencers, decision makers, and advocates and activists. However, and according to the UN, in addition to the persistent pre-existing social and systemic barriers to women's participation and leadership, new barriers have emerged during this time of COVID-19. Across the world, women are facing increased domestic violence, unpaid childcare duties, as well as unemployment and poverty. So this conversation will examine all of these issues and more, and look at them again, specifically at the interface of sport with thought leaders and practitioners that are joining us today. So I thank you for joining us today and invite you to learn, to lean in, and to listen as we engage in this wonderful conversation. If you would like to share your story, or if you have questions of interest, place them in the chat box and we will do our best to work those questions in near the end of the program. As we commence today's conversation, I want us to reflect upon this time, again, to celebrate and honor women. And to do so, we're gonna start with a video clip provided by the International Women's Day and their challenge to hashtag choose to challenge. So take a moment to listen in.
Gender is a pre-written book, and the plot is boring. Daughter, girlfriend, mother, wife, rip out the pages, staple them to your back, and start soaring. Pretty, quiet, weak. They will try to describe you with such things, but you will use their stereotypes and turn them into your wings. When you choose to challenge. Gender is a pre-written book, but not all the girls' stories end the same way. 33,000 girls are forced to become child brides every day. 132 million girls are not in school, and their futures are balloons that they watch drift away. But you are the full stop to the story. You are the new sentence that takes it on a different road. When you speak up, you open your palms and you share the load. When you choose to challenge. Gender is a pre-written book, but not all of the characters are included, like the First Nations women who stand as still as statues, always walked past but never acknowledged or seen, or migrant women whose culture stands like a skyscraper, and they're forced to burn down the parts of themselves society doesn't deem convenient, or refugee women who are treated with brutality when we should have been lenient. And you are there as this story unfolds and you are faced with a choice. So choose to challenge. Gender is a pre-written book, and this is your chance to add your own chapter, to call out racism and sexism and use courage to rub it out, to stand where the rest of the world has chosen to sit, to call it out at home, at work, at school, bit by bit, to scream where the world has chosen to whisper, not just for your daughter, your mother, or your sister. Let us choose to challenge. Gender is a pre-written book, and if you're listening to this, then your actions are the pen, your life is the paper. You are not the oppression of the past. I believe that you are so much greater, stronger, kinder. Choose to create history. not to be created by it. Choose to challenge.
What a powerful video message, and again, an opportunity to choose to challenge. So today we'll get into that conversation, equitable futures for women in sport. So let's get into it. Today we're gonna challenge you in a conversation to look at representation and participation, understand the importance of equity, to examine leadership and hiring, challenging gendered ideologies and gender norms, as well as looking at this notion of sustaining movement efforts. And as we say at the Institute, moving from words to action. Joining us in our conversation today is Donna Callahan. Donna has been involved with adaptive sport professionals for more than 20 years. In 2017, she founded All in Sports Consulting and has worked with numerous nationally known clients, including the Endeavor Games Series, Heibel Sports Medicine Center, Warrior Games, and the US Figure Skating. In 2020, All in Sports presented the inaugural Adapted Sport Leadership and Business Symposium, a virtual conference aimed to advance the adapted sports movement. Again, welcome Donna Callahan, CEO and founder of All in Sports Consulting. Next, we have Jenny Lim. Jenny Lim is a program manager at Canadian Women in Sport and is responsible for the development and execution of several gender equity solutions for Canadian sport organizations, such as the Gender Equity Lens e-module, Gender Equity in Sport Assessment, Gender Equity Action Plan, and Equity and Coaching in Same Game. Graduating with a sport and exercise science degree from the University of Auckland in New Zealand, where she's coming to us from today, so excited. She worked at a regional sport trust in a variety of roles, including health promotion, community sport delivery, funding administration, project management, and strategic leadership, with particular focus and passion in diversity and inclusion in sport. During her time there, she held a number of advisory and board positions with schools, universities, community, and sport organizations, sharing her perspective and voice as a woman of color in sport and leadership. Welcome, Jenny. And last and certainly not least, Danielle Slayton, who is the Director of External Relations at Santa Clara University. She does much more than that though. Danielle is a former USWNT player who won a silver medal at the 2000 Olympic Games, go ahead, and was a member of the third place 2003 FIFA World Cup squad. In 2020, she was selected by the Carolina Courage as WUSA's first overall draft pick and was named a WUSA, Defender of the Year. Lost my place. Currently, Danielle serves as a soccer television analyst for our very own San Jose Earthquakes, as well as Fox Sports and Pac-12 Network. She was also a match analyst during the 2015, I should say, and 2019 FIFA Women's World Cup. She sits on the board of directors for the U.S. Soccer Foundation and Bay Area Women's Sport Initiative, and is a member of SCORE, the Soccer Collective on Racial Equity. Thank you, each and every one of you. Last and certainly not least, joining us in co-moderating this amazing panel is my co-host, my colleague, Dr. Amy August, who is an assistant director with the Institute, as we know, but also an assistant professor at our very own San Jose State University. Welcome everybody as we get into this wonderful conversation today. And one of the first things that I typically ask our panelists as we kind of get into our opening statements and conversation, I always like to ask, what does sport mean to you? And as you consider this notion of what does sport mean to you, I also want a moment to reflect and sort of remember, how have you been honoring Women's History Month? So again, what does sport mean to you, and how have you been honoring or recognizing Women's History Month? So we'll start with Donna.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today on the panel. As far as what sport means to me, in the adapted sport world, we talk a lot about the power of sport, and the transformational power of sport for people with disabilities. For me, sport led me to my career. It led me to my husband, who's an adaptive ski instructor, and he and I met at an adapted ski event almost 20 years ago. So that's pretty exciting. And it's opened up a whole new world of contacts and a network and a community of wheelchair racers, a community of adapted sport skiers, mono skiers. So for me, it's kind of not just a profession, but it's very personal to me as well.
Thank you. Jenny, what does sport mean to you, and how have you been celebrating this particular month?
Thank you, and it's great to be here. I think for me, I grew up in a small village in Malaysia, in a town called Lahadatu, and there isn't much else to do but to play sport. And so we would, with the kids in the village, play badminton across the fence and make games up, using coconut leaves that have fallen. And so I've grown up sort of finding my place in activity and play and sport. And aside from always having participated in sport, much like Donna, it also led me to my career. It also, most of my paid jobs have been in sport, and especially after my family have moved to New Zealand, and then later on moving to Canada, being an Asian woman in Canadian and New Zealand sport, where the sport environment has in many ways magnified my sense of being different, of not sort of being seen as one of them, and having many assumptions being made about my ability to perform or to lead or to represent because of the way I look. But fortunately, it's also through sport that I've learned to be proud of my identity, and that I've also been fortunate to be given many platforms to speak not only on my experience, but to be able to use it to be an ally for change, and ultimately being put into positions where we can help develop tangible solutions to advance gender equity in sport. So there's a very special place in my life and my heart for sport. How I've been honoring this month, I think in some ways it's been a very, very busy month for us because, whether it's positive or negative, there's a lot of things happening this month that is being put on women serving organizations and women individually. And I think I've been honoring this month by reminding people around me to take time for self-care, to say, yes, this is a month to honor you, and yet it has burdened a lot of women by having to speak on a lot of experiences that could be traumatizing or could have caused harm, but also an opportunity for women to speak of their pride and their success in whatever they're doing. And so I think it's a month of reflection, a month of growth, and I think ultimately a month of strength that can be shown with women coming together like we are today.
Thank you so much for that. And you were talking about sort of the burden and the double duties, and I'll be very brief. I was running frantically around, trying to homeschool, trying to make lunch, and at the same time getting ready to launch a wonderful webinar with some stimulating conversation, which I would consider my self-care space sometimes. So thank you for saying that and for sharing that as well. Danielle Slayton, talk to us a little bit about what sport means to you, and again, how you've been celebrating this month.
Sport to me is opportunity. It gave me the chance to use my body and athleticism as a kid. It gave me the opportunity to try things and fail at things and learn all of these lessons along the way that, quite frankly, I use on a daily basis as an adult now. I think sport provides the platform for kids and boys and girls and men and women to be able to particularly try these things that we expect them to do as adults. And sport gave me the chance to do this. And much like Donna and Jenny have said, I was fortunate enough to be able to transform play into a job and a career. And so I feel really, really grateful for that. I have gotten to travel the world and meet the most amazing, strongest, badass women of my life because of sport. And I feel really grateful for that. Maybe a little bit like Jenny, when I think about Women's History Month, I swear, I mean, being a Black woman, Black History Month rolls right into Women's History Month. I'm like, there's so much to do for these 2 months. So I feel like I have definitely been busy, but I consider it an honor. I consider it sometimes a calling or a duty to be able to participate and give back and help the next generation, you know, maybe learn a thing or two or get their eyes open to a thing or two. So it's an honor to participate, but it's tiring at times for sure. And I think what I've really been trying to do is be really intentional about kind of, I guess, cleaning up my social media. So being really intentional about who I choose to follow, who I choose to listen to, and really making sure that I'm listening to people or hearing from people that are filling me up, that are not detracting or not sucking my energy. And so kind of cleaning up my my Instagram or my Twitter and following the right folks is something I've been really trying to do this month.
Great. Oh my gosh, just so many tips I'm starting to think about as well. Like, what do I need to do? My social media game is not probably where it needs to be. So I'm still learning, if you will. As we move into this first segment, I sort of think about this past year just being again, an amazing year visibly for women in the US and beyond, from Megan Rapinoe fighting for sports equality and equity, to the women of the WNBA and their social justice efforts, to Vice President Harris having a seat in the White House, if you will. So I wanted to sort of start with some of our most public facing industries of sort of media and marketing, and really not to spend too much time, but just to spotlight this. Dr. Amy August brought this to my attention yesterday. Speaking of Wyoming Attias, two-time back-to-back Olympic gold medalist, right? She changed the game, but it talks about in this particular article that Yahoo Sports has released, Wyoming Attias made Olympic history in 1968 and no one cared. And so there's so many conversations, so many directions that we can go from there. But I want to open it up to Danielle to sort of shed light for us first and foremost. I know it's a loaded question with a number of complex factors, but from your perspective, can you comment on the state of women in sport media, to include women of color, LGBTQ+, and other historically marginalized groups, with regard to representation and sort of how we cultivate them in our history to ensure that their narrative is there?
It's not there yet. It's sadly, that's a very simple question to answer. It's not there. The complicated and maybe the conversation we need to have is, how do we get there? I have been in television and working on the soccer side of things for, I would say, about 10 years now. And very rarely, I'm starting to see it more and more, very rarely do I see a woman of color on television in soccer. I think historically, when I first started, I started as a sideline reporter, and you have this image of the blonde, beautiful woman on the sideline asking the opinion of the big football player and, you know, getting his thoughts on something. The direction that we're headed, and I'm grateful for that, and I feel a responsibility in this fight, is to not only be present and having women and girls who look like me on television, but making sure that the words that are come out of my mouth are articulate, that my opinion matters just as much as the football player who I might be interviewing. My thoughts, my opinions, my perspective, and what I say and how I give voice to the game of soccer, particularly in my situation, it's important. And so I take that very seriously. I think the challenge comes from, changing the minds of people who have been at the highest echelons in television and in media, people who are the executives making the decisions about if you get hired, what games you get to cover, and things like that. So it is important for us to continue to fight to have diversity at that table. So it's not just an executive saying, oh, well, she's like the girl next door, and so that's why I'm going to put her on. Well, she's not like the girl next door that I grew up next to. So continuing to fight to have a seat at that table, at the decision-making table. And for us, when we do get up there, to send the elevator back down and say, yes, you're coming up next, you're following me, so we can start to have diversity, whether it's women of color, LGBTQ representation, or any representation that expands beyond what we've seen historically as, you know, the white male who is representing and telling the stories of sports on TV.
Thanks, Danielle. My next question is for Donna. Acknowledging what Danielle just mentioned about the lack of representation at those highest tables, how is the representation of communities with a disability affected by that lack of diversity at the table? Maybe tell us first just a little bit about how athletes with disabilities are represented in the media and how that compares to athletes without disabilities. And then second, maybe tell us a little bit more specifically about the representation of female athletes with disabilities. And you might want to consider the forthcoming 2020 Olympics and Paralympic Games, or just sport engagement in general over the past like 10 months or so since the pandemic started.
That's a lot. Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. So as Danielle said, you know, and when I was reading over the materials to get prepared for today, one of my initial thoughts was, oh my gosh, I hope I don't come across as a Debbie Downer, because in the disability sport world, we have so far to go, so incredibly far to go. We know that there isn't a lot of representation of athletes or female athletes with disabilities in the media. And a lot of times, if there is, it's more of a special interest story versus a badass athlete story. So we really need to switch the narrative on that. You know, and I think about a couple weeks ago, NBC announced their schedule for Paralympics, Tokyo Paralympics coverage. Jury's still out as far as I'm concerned. They made this amazing announcement right back before Pyeongchang and said, oh, we have expanded coverage and all of our networks and all of our channels, but it was at 2 o'clock in the morning. So what are you gonna do with that? So let's all check back in August and September in hopes that we can see something during the day, not in the middle of the night. That would be some progress. And then we also, I think we have a huge opportunity coming up with LA 2028. If there's anybody that knows how to, you know, do coverage the right way, Hollywood and LA is the place to do it, right? So let's hope that within the next 7 years that LA 2028 can really come through and create that equal exposure for athletes with disabilities. And I just have this really interesting couple things. One, the LA or the London 2012 games, Channel 4 was amazing. If anyone wanted to Google that or YouTube, it was a broadcast channel that covered the Paralympic Games there, world class, amazing job. Did the same type of coverage all day long like NBC does here in the States. It was run and managed and led and produced by other people with disabilities. So when you saw commentators, they were in chairs, they had amputations, they had a visual impairment, and they were, you know, taking hold of the media and the coverage there. And when we think about coverage today on teamusa.com, Oksana Masters, who is a really badass Paralympian, she's a rower, she's a cyclist, and she's a Nordic biathlon athlete. She swept all the medals at the Nordic World Cup this last week. She won 3 golds in biathlon and 3 golds in Nordic. Now, if that was Lindsey Vonn or Michaela Schifrin, it would be top-notch news on ESPN. And her teammate came in, you know, second, getting the silver medal most of the time, right behind her within just seconds. So that's the thing we need to think about, and we need to start learning about these athletes, changing the perception, changing the narrative from social interest stories to these people are really kick-ass and we want to learn about them and we want to know about them. And we need to understand a little bit more of what being an athlete with a disability means, and that lived experience, and what that diversity can mean to the business world, to the sport world, and all the interactions we have as athletes and as sport leaders across the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, it's so many pieces to this wheel that you have illuminated. Some of this we'll get into in our next segment when we talk about sort of leadership and hiring, which you alluded to. Some of those individuals in those seats that we're helping to broadcast look like you know, and it's one of those things. Again, Danielle said the same thing as well. So I come to you, Jenny, with sort of a similar question. So this notion of from the outside looking in, so to speak, how has media representation affected the participation of girls and women in sport in Canada, particularly based on your work efforts as a part of the Canadian Women in Sport organization? And have you seen any effect of the pandemic on the participation rates?
Yeah, absolutely. And much like all around the world, you know, we have a long way to go, even when it comes to gender equity in media coverage and representation. One of our most recent reports, the Rally report, we shared that only 4% of traditional media coverage out of 35,000 hours of sports programming was devoted to women's sport, let alone the consideration of intersectionality within that, right? Like you can only imagine what meager amount of coverage is being is allocated to women with diverse backgrounds. And really interestingly, just this week actually in New Zealand, a research was released that men's rugby gets more than double the amount of coverage of all women's sport combined. And so that just goes to show how far away we can go. And absolutely it affects participation, not just in the way that we traditionally think about it in terms of having role models. You can't be what you can't see. We want to see women and girls on TV, on social media, on print. But also it has an immense impact on things like sponsorship. It has impact on what opportunities there are for women and girls to even participate, let alone at a high level. We've heard in our work with sports organizations in Canada, we've heard stories many a times of sponsors coming to organizations and specifically saying that they want to fund the men's team only or the men's program only. And, you know, it puts sports organizations in a place where they have to say, look, we need you to also fund the women's team. And more often than not, it's such a purely business decision that it takes a bit of reminding to say, hey, look, we have other teams too in our sport. And so I think there's a role to play for everyone. And I think there's a tendency maybe to oversimplify issues here. I think absolutely it's also having more hours on TV, but it's also us as consumers to be interested in women's sport and to actually ask for it and to watch it when it does come on, because ultimately we want to see it impacting sort of the business in a sense that we want to make it clear that, yes, there is a business opportunity in women's sport. There is an opportunity in disability sport. And yes, we've seen the pandemic affect participation at many levels. And like Akil, I just thought it was so, it just illustrates the point of how women are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, you know, minutes, and, you know, Akil said this, but minutes before we went live, she had to run downstairs, check on a child, come back up. And we know that in sport, women are already in a vulnerable position in terms of being at a high risk of being left behind when it comes to planning, especially planning the return to sport. We're already seeing that women athletes who are already fighting to get equal access to things like facilities, equipment, and funding prior to the pandemic, being left behind in the management of the pandemic by so many sports organizations. So at Canadian Women in Sport, we've really focused our efforts in communicating and reminding our sports system that, hey, don't abandon the gender lens when you're making plans to come back from the pandemic. And we're very sensitive to the fact that organizations are at a time where they're also grappling with some very devastating financial losses because of events being cancelled and programs being cancelled. And we know that there's always going to be a risk that organizations will not have the capacity to invest resource or time into considering the gender equity lens in their return to sports plan. But fortunately, in the last year, we've engaged with more sports organization that we have, a lot of times because, well, now we don't have programs or events, so we have plenty of time. Everyone on our team is free in this period when we traditionally never have. So let's get the team together and really reflect, and not to be corny, but to choose to challenge the status quo, because we've just been rolling from one season to another for so many years that we never had time to stop and reflect. And we're seeing a lot of organizations, from what I know in Canada, leaders taking a stand to say, okay, now's the time. It doesn't all need to be bad. Let's make some good out of this situation. And so it makes us really hopeful that not only have we not gone backwards through the pandemic, but we've persisted and we've continued to move the needle in spite of it.
So wonderful to share that. You know, as I think about that, again, I think what you're speaking of lenses into sort of this next segment of leadership and hiring. So much of what each of you have shared sort of reflects the deeply rooted historical seeds of gendered ideology, gender norms. As you said, yes, I've been running around here making meals, cooking, you know, getting off my third shift, if you will. Want to unpack a little bit some of the contemporary effects of sort of history and tradition on our present day understanding of leadership and hiring practices. And so Donna, if you could sort of give us some insight a little bit into some of the work that you've done. You've conducted some extraordinary work with a range of organizations, as I presented in that amazing bio, conducting training and facilitation. Could you share with our audience how women have historically shown up in these spaces and how we prepare for new engagements and quite possibly, you know, make adjustments post-COVID?
Yeah, so my perspective is as a woman with a disability, and I can tell you again, it's kind of going to be a broken record. We have a long way to go. But what I've been trying to share a lot and connect with in people in my business and share this story and hoping to make something come of this idea. And I know this because before I came into the sport world as a professional, I was an HR professional in Silicon Valley. And I forgot to mention I am a San Jose State grad and went to graduate school there, yay. Go Spartans. So I'm familiar with Silicon Valley and all the progressive work they do in disability and hiring practices, but we still have a long ways to go. But what I'd like to think is that in the sport world, there is a connection for people with disabilities. A lot of times once someone discovers sport, it opens up a whole new world for them. They now have a self-esteem that is sky high. They have a social network of friends and classmates that they interact with. They understand and know that a secondary college education is not off the table for them. They know that they can have a family and get married. So a lot of times sport is very much a launch pad or a starting place for people with disabilities, for girls and for women to even understand that employment and career and success in the business world is an opportunity that they can pursue. I'd like to think that there is opportunities with last year being the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, that each year we'd like to think we gain traction with that and education and awareness amongst business leaders. There's a couple nonprofits out there related to disability and employment in the US that really do help connect some of those next gen leaders, those young professionals, into the world of work and career. But I think also something we need to be aware of here, and we haven't mentioned it today, but when we talk about sexism and genderism and racism, people with disabilities also have ableism, which is something that they have to overcome, which is subtle or not subtle discrimination when someone sees someone with a disability, that because their body isn't fully functioning, they are better than someone with a disability. And so there's a lot of obstacles, a lot of barriers, a lot of awareness, a lot of education that needs to happen. I'd like to think because of the pandemic, there's some silver linings. One is the ability to work remotely now. For many, many years, people with disabilities have fought and advocated for opportunities to work from home because of transportation challenges and various other things, and now they can do that. So I'd like to think that's opened up a whole new world and is a silver lining. And I'd like to think that because of what we've experienced this last year, that people have a little more patience, a little more grace, and understanding where people are coming from, and taking a moment to understand their perspective, understand their lived experiences, and figure out a way to be creative. We've all had to be creative and adapt this year. And honestly, there's no one better at adapting than people with disabilities, because we live in a world that isn't made for us. So we have to adapt every day. So I think that also is a silver lining in that, you know, employers will hopefully acknowledge that and realize that for people with disabilities, that they're super creative and know how to come up with really awesome solutions to different challenges.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is for Jenny, but I kind of want to introduce it first a little bit with one of our connections and our partner organizations that we've been working with. We've actually had some candid conversations through our working relationship with IWG, the International Working Group on Women in Sport, which is the world's largest network dedicated to empowering women and girls and advancing sport. It's fully aligned to the 17-time United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular, those to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. It was established in 1994, and the IWG advocates for and runs programs globally to support gender equity in sport and physical activity year-round. So often there are traditional narratives, ideologies, and norms about gender, which cause those who want to improve conditions for women to take a deficit approach that really focuses on fixing girls and women, as opposed to making systems and institutions less sexist. So some examples might include providing training to women to help them meet the standards or to survive the industry. So my question for you really is, how do we shift the narrative and the framing and really the preparation of all individuals in sport and sport adjacent spaces, so that we can start to see this as a systemic issue as opposed to something that's wrong with women and girls?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that a lot with a lot of organizations we work with. And one aspect of that is an organization wants to be seen as doing something. And so what is the most attention grabbing thing we can do that has women and girls plastered all over the name or the poster? And so we see things like, okay, well, we need more women coaches, so let's do a women's only coach training session. And I think it's this, again, going back to the tendency of wanting to oversimplify things. We want to boil things down to one solution. And so we end up not recognizing just how complex the issues of inequity is. And as a result, the solutions that we often put in place are these silver bullet type solutions that don't actually get to the root of the issue. And so in the work that we do, what we're trying to really do is, and we as an organization, Canadian Women in Sport, has evolved over time. We did also play a huge part in offering some of these training sessions, like you've mentioned, you know, women in leadership, women in, and we still do. And there is absolutely value in that. But there is also a huge role to play as leaders and organizations and people who are gatekeepers or decision makers in the sports sector, like what Danielle has mentioned, at the highest level of various players within the sports system. And so recognizing that gender inequity, exclusion, all the isms need to be need to be addressed at all levels of the sport. Yes, at the individual level. Yes, at the interpersonal level when we talk about networks and mentoring opportunities, but absolutely at the organizational level. And it's not always sexy to talk about policies, practices, HR, how you recruit, how you set up your selection panels, who are on the selection panels. And then there's the structural and societal norms that we also want to look at. And so what we're seeing through our work is more of a willingness to start to unpack, okay, let's go through the entire pipeline of our sport, right from governance and leadership, who's on our board, what's on our skills matrix, all the way to what's our procurement policy, supplier diversity, how does one choose to participate in our sport? And when we start to unpack all of those areas, we start to see, okay, well, the pipe is leaking at all kinds of levels. So our solution needs to, it needs to be implemented at all these levels. And so we as individuals within the sports system also need to recognize that everyone has a role to play, not just women, not just, not just us saying that. And I think I resonate a lot with Donna, what you're sharing, because in the disability space, so often workplaces say, well, we'll make the accommodations when you tell us about it. Or we'll do this but if you didn't tell us, then we can't accommodate. And so much of that burden is being put on the person that is requiring, that needs to adapt. And so often it doesn't come out because of the culture of the organization. So I think absolutely the organizations and the players in the system needs to be cognizant and aware of and to continue to learn about different lived experiences.
Thank you so much. Again, just speaking to gender norms, but again, the awareness and just consciousness of what is going on with our, and who are the people that are a part of our organization, understanding them better. Danielle, same question, but sort of shifting the focus a little bit to sport organizations and institutions. I know you're currently housed in an institution of higher education, but at the same time working with a number of these organizations at the professional and Olympic level. How can women and girls, as well as allies, as one of our attendees have pointed out, men, boys can also be a part of this conversation as well. But how can girls and women, as well as allies, begin to shift the narrative and chart their own path when the culture and decision makers remain the same?
Yeah, I think it's hard. And to Jenny's point, it's not one silver bullet answer. I think if it was, we'd have figured it out by now. But when I think of leadership, and I think of like historically in America in particular, right? We have this man on a pedestal who knows all of the answers and is going to like lead us, across the Delaware River to fight the British or whatever it is, right? And that historically has been this model that we have of leadership. And we see it in organizations, we see it in companies, we see it like infiltrated all throughout our culture in America. But with the reality of how quickly the world is changing, I mean, Donna talked about it, I live in Silicon Valley, like things are changing by the day here, that there's no possible way that one leader could know everything about everything and possibly be the answer for us in any sense, whether you're leading an organization, whether you're president of the United States, whether you're leading, an NGO, it isn't possible. And so I get hopeful because when I think of women, I think, what do we do well? We network, we talk to people, we know how to get things done. We know that we might not know the answer to everything, but you know what? I know who I can ask to find out. I mean, Akila, you talked about this, like there is nothing smarter or more innovative than a mom who needs to find a way to get something done, right? Like, you know that you have to figure it out and you're going to leverage every possible resource that you have to get to the answer. So I am hopeful that as women, we continue to make these steps forward, that we are actually going to be very well positioned to be excellent leaders for what the world is calling us to do going forward, that we are going to have to be more networked, that we are going to have to be more empathetic, that we are going to have leaders who understand that it's less about position, it's more about relationships, and it's more about learning how to think, not necessarily having all of the answers, asking the right questions. So I am hopeful. Is it easy? Is it a short-term quick solution? No, but I do think there's a responsibility for us to continue to help mentor and bring along the next generation as we continue to, climb our way up the ladder and get in those board seats. But then I also too think it's very important, as you referenced, talking about allies and how Jenny talked about this isn't a woman's issue, right? This is a human issue, and we need all people to help us solve the problem and all people to play their role. That it's going to be a continued awakening and reckoning, if you will, with everyone across the world, to understand that diversity and women at a seat at the table is actually better for everybody. It's not this law of like, if I'm going to take a bigger piece of the pie, then you're going to get less. It's if a woman is seated at the table, like we're all going to make more pie, like there's going to be more. It's this law of abundance. And so I think hopefully continuing to change the narrative around that, to understand that diversity is actually going to breed success, and that it's beneficial for that person in power to have a woman at the table, because it's going to be beneficial for the woman and them too. Like more is going to get accomplished, or more is going to get done, or more money is going to get made, or more progress is going to be made forward. So I think it's not a simple solution, but I am very hopeful about the fact that women, again, it's a big stereotype, but that we are going to be well positioned to be quality, effective leaders if and when we have the opportunity to do so.
Thanks so much for that hopeful message, Danielle. I think that really gives us something to look forward to, and to actually it's motivational just to think about this being a possibility. So I really appreciate that. With that, I want to transition into our third segment, which is really about sustaining movement efforts. So it's kind of the perfect segue. In the last segment, in this last segment, we'd like to explore how we sustain and continue to move our efforts for girls and women in sport forward. We want to take the opportunity to learn from each of you. How do we move beyond just the buzzwords of equality and equity, Title IX, DEI, education to action, and how do we make these things more tangible? And so my first question then is going to be for Jenny. The Canadian Women's Sport Organization is taking some real steps to address issues of gender equality and equity for girls and women. And so what are some of the social justice efforts or solutions that you've identified already? And what solutions are transferable and perhaps shareable beyond the geographic boundary lines of Canada?
Thank you. I think something that we've observed in especially the last year is just a rise in willingness and awareness and interest in stories of people from different lived experiences. There's also a willingness of people with unique and diverse lived experiences to speak up and share their stories. And I think this is really important, because when we talk about gender equity especially, or diversity and inclusion, we sort of have this caricature of someone that isn't white, isn't a man, that is in the center of this BIPOC conversation, and without the realization that actually it's women and girls are very diverse, like what we're learning today, even just around this virtual table. And so I think the rise in this willingness to share stories is really powerful, and something that we're harnessing. I think we recognize that people don't know what they don't know, and they will only learn if more of us share. And so we have an empathy it's called the She's Got It All campaign, and we highlight these stories. She's got it all: focus, talent, and equipment that the boys don't want anymore. And a series of things like that show, okay, this is what it's like to be a girl or woman in sport, and what we really want to do as well is, okay, so once people understand what the needs are, what the barriers are, let's talk about solutions. And so we call ourselves a solutions partner. And it seems like, I guess, in the last year and a half, 2 years, we haven't stopped building things. We haven't stopped developing programs and solutions, because the more we learn, the more organizations we work with, the more unique the needs are and the issues are. And so the more unique and up to date the solutions need to be. I think we'll be sharing some of the resources that we've created, but it sort of goes to that thinking of, you know, the solution needs to be applied at all different levels of the sport. So we have something that targets individuals. We have the gender equity lens e-module, which talks to individuals in any kind of role in sport to learn to use a gender lens in day-to-day decisions, even decisions that aren't obviously gendered. You know, and I think that's going to, because we know so many non-gendered decisions result in gendered impacts. And so this is our way of sort of trying to communicate, okay, let's get everyone to understand what we're talking about when we talk about gender equity, and then apply it as a day-to-day, as a habit. We also have our gender equity assessments. It's part of the gender equity playbook, where we work with organizations and we really look at every nook and cranny of this organization and try and find solutions and recommendations to meet them where they are, and then help them take a step forward when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then you'll see that we have an action plan that comes after that. So we don't just want to find all the issues. We don't just want to find all the gaps. We want to try and, you know, find ways to patch them up and to help the organization be more equitable. And so it's been a really exciting process, because I think we've done a lot of advocacy, we've done a lot of research, and I think really, you know, words to action. Now it's time to take action. You know, we're always learning, we're always finding, okay, this is an area that we need solutions for, so let's learn and build that. So yeah, it's been a really exciting time at Canadian Women in Sport.
Thank you so much. I took opportunity to try to drop some of those links in the chat for our audience so they could gain those. But again, we will be sharing out those resources again for you to go through. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to sort of think about that as well as we do move forward, continue to move forward in these movements. And we know that it's been nearly 10 months since the murder of George Floyd and this resurgence of Black Lives Matter. We find that racial unrest and racism are still ever present. We're having meetings and DEI conversations every day. And to Danielle's point, yes, it's meeting after meeting, webinar after webinar. But I do find it does get a little taxing, but at the same time, it's something that's necessary and needed. Nevertheless, when we have those, in some ways we may see them as sort of reactive, even DEI hirings and trainings. So Donna, my question to you is, how do concerns about racial equity intersect with those with regard to gender equity for people with disability in sport? And what are some concrete steps, or what concrete steps have organizations taken to that point of words to action, as well as their leaders, to address these issues?
So I think, you know, when we talk about intersectionality, again, we talk a lot about race and gender. And a message I've been sharing probably since the beginning of the year is disability is diversity. And when we bring our DEI community or committee to the table, we have to make sure that disability is represented, because disability affects all of us. You know, and there's diversity within disability. So if you think of someone who is an amputee and they're entering their career, did they lose it on the battlefield, or did they lose their leg from cancer during high school? All of those have really diverse perspectives and experiences to share that are valuable in the work world. But I think we need to talk about, you know, when we talk about intersectionality, I think we need to be all encompassing of that diverse community. And that's really just been something I've been kind of advocating a lot about in my business recently. And I do work with grassroots adapted sport organizations across the country, and I've encouraged them all, as they work in their community with their sports commissions or their youth leagues, to make sure that in those leadership committees that there is someone there representing disability to bring in that perspective. So I do think we're making progress there, and I do think that those conversations have begun because of the last 10 months. I don't think we'd be where we are today without what happened last summer or in the last year, with people being open to new conversations. But I do think we need to always remember to include diversity in that. I have seen a number of organizations, adapted sport organizations, national sport organizations bring together DEI committees. I hope and pray that they are authentic and genuine and there for the right reasons and not there to check the box because it's the hip and sexy thing to do these days. And I think the more that you have that committee is made up of those authentic and people who are passionate about that and have that lived experience can contribute to that, I think you'll have better outcomes in that sense by creating a team or a committee of folks who are passionate, who get stuff done, who have been advocates in this space for a long time. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but I have seen activity across the country, and I have been encouraging my clients, my partners, the groups I work with across the country to please make sure that disability is a part of that DEI committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. It's so fascinating. Excuse me, my mute didn't want to work. It's so fascinating to hear about the efforts that you've been doing on the ground to ensure that diversity is included in those DEI committees. So I want to kind of turn a similar question to Danielle. How do we get involved in movements that sustain social justice efforts? So, beyond DEI committees, these larger movements that are occurring worldwide, how do we get involved in them, and including like social justice efforts that have been demonstrated by organizations like the WNBA, by athletes like Naomi Osaka and Megan Rapinoe, and how can individuals like you and me use our platforms to give voice and promote the empowerment of all of those around us, including our next generations and rising youth?
I think the simple answer is we just choose to do it. Like, we all have a platform. I might not have the platform that Megan Rapinoe has, right? I don't have that many Twitter followers and I'm not on magazine covers. But I have a voice in my community. I have a voice here today. And so I think that the simple answer is that, again, it kind of goes back to the leadership conversation that we all make a choice to do something. We find something, we care about it, and then we just take one step forward in service, right? And it could be as simple as holding the door for somebody when they have like their hands full of groceries. It could be, inspiring the next generation with the neighbor next door and saying, hey, let's come kick the soccer ball with me today, right? It can be in countless small ways or in big ways, but understanding that all of us have a platform. All of us have a voice in this. Some of us might have bigger megaphones than others, but we all can use our voice to make positive change. And quite frankly, that's the only way it's going to happen. I mean, I like Dawn, I am hopeful that the world will be better after this crazy year. But it's only going to be better if all of us continue to sustain this effort towards equity in our world. And it's really what this institute embodies, right? It's about taking words and moving it into action. And I think sometimes we can maybe feel intimidated that like, well, I can't make that big of a difference, or I don't know what to do. Well, just do something. That's it. And I think that is, walking through one door will help us see what the doors are beyond that door. And that's how we just have to keep progressing in that way. So in that sense, Donna, I'm covering the Olympics. And so call me and I will figure out which door I need to knock on at NBC to help if I can. Again, like, I'm not an executive, I'm not a decision maker, but my voice and saying, hey, this woman who hired me, like, this is important. What are we doing about this? What, like, how are the Paralympics being covered? What can we have in that? Or, hey, Alex Morgan, you're going to be playing in the Olympics. I don't know if she's going to make the team. I don't have any insight into that, so don't ask me. But, you know, Alex Morgan, you're going to be playing in the Olympics. Who are the Paralympians that you could help use your platform to highlight, you know? So it could be something as small as me making a call or writing an email, or it could be something as we've seen like the players in the WNBA do, or Megan Rapinoe do as well. But just,
you know, we're recording this, so I'll come back.
I'm in. I know. I work in television. The camera's always on. Somebody's always listening. So I'm good. I'm committed. But I am serious. So let's talk after this.
This is wonderful, you know, and this is, you know, I think this is a great place. Like I said, became a place of healing for me. Yes, I was frantic when we started trying to move around, just to make sure everybody in my household was okay, whether it be my little one or my fourth grader as well, that we've eaten and can get our homework done. But I find this also, again, an opportunity with this platform, again, to speak with these amazing, amazing women that are here with us today. And so I wanted us to continue the conversation. I see we're forging some synergies, which is going to be great. But I think, again, with the Institute, it is one where we are trying to have everybody join the conversation and see where they fit in. Because we'll have a great opportunity next week. I just think about an opportunity to work with our kinesiology department and talk with students about how they can use their platform for social change. And everyone perhaps thinks of it in terms of, I need to demonstrate, I need to march. But knowing that you have a tech background is important. Knowing that you have a microphone is important. Knowing that you can be an artist or connect people on platforms such as this is important. And so we'll be sort of speaking to that next week, and that everybody has a role in these conversations, and just to, as you said, Danielle, choose to do something. Part of that choose to do something is, you know, this is a spot as well for, you know, choose to come to the Institute, support the Institute, so we can continue to have these conversations, to forge these relationships and continue to merge. Again, whether it be speaking, as I talk about our sport conversations for change, and even check out some of our webinars, which I'll share here in a little bit. Give to the institution to continue to support the students. We have some fabulous interns that are with us, and they are supporting our efforts. Give to them to support them and their research endeavors, their engagements, and their willingness to learn more about social change. And lastly, part of it is just even coming over to visit our Martin Luther King Jr. Library to view our Dr. Harry Edwards collection and learn more about the Olympic Project for Human Rights, for which this institute is grounded in. So again, SJSU, words to action. Some of the things that sort of bring this conversation to a close, but at the same time continue to sharing knowledge, is to think about the UN. Again, this is not a US issue. This is not an SJSU issue when we talk about women in sport. It's a great opportunity to continue to learn about the history of Women's Day, International Women's Day, how it's celebrated, where you can observe it, and what people have done over the past few years, as well as just its history behind it and what they're doing today to celebrate that particular journey. So I welcome you into that space. And thinking of this notion of words to action, our amazing panelists will share the organizations that they're a part of just shortly. But before we go into that, we wanted to sort of honor and highlight some of the great women and organizations we've worked with over the past few months that are working towards creating notions of allyship, educating, sharing their voice, and putting programs, services, speaking to policies as they begin to speak on issues of equity and equality when we talk about girls and women in sports participation. Thinking of Athlete Ally, Behind the Whistle, Black Women's Sports Foundation, Burn It All Down podcast, ESPNW, International Working Group, Through Her Eyes Project, the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport, the Wall of Song Project, and the Women's Sports Foundation. These are just a few. They are certainly not a complete list, but we want you to definitely connect with those particular organizations. And thinking about our last two that we talked about, the Wall of Song Project and the Women's Sports Foundation, as we said, we had a special program last month in February to talk about feeling good, celebrating National Girls and Women in Sports Day. And so we recorded that. We have that live on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to check it out. Hear those conversations, join in the singing, and add your voice to the Wall of Song Project. So as we sort of come to a close, I want to take an opportunity to hear from our panelists today. What are, one to two things you want our audience to take away from our conversation? And are there any resources that we need to know about as it pertains to all the work that you do in All in Sport Consulting? Donna Callahan.
Oh, thank you. It's been so awesome. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of today. So a couple of things. I think one of my biggest takeaways, or that I would like attendees to take away with, is to remember that disability is diversity, and to always make sure that that's included in any sport conversations, work or business conversations, hiring conversations, to make sure, because imagine if all the intersectionality, if you are a Paralympian with a visual impairment, you're a Black woman and you're a lesbian. I mean, think about, how much energy it takes for someone like that to get out there and put themselves in the sport world, in the professional world. And it'd be great to have champions out in the sport world and professional world to help support them. Two, I just wanted to, if you go to my website, All in Sport Consulting, you can sign up to subscribe to my monthly newsletter and get tidbits and information of new things coming up related to the adapted sport movement across the country. And then also this morning in the newsletter that went out, we announced the second annual Adapted Sport Leadership and Business Symposium, which we refer to as Adapted Sport Labs, where we take some bigger conversations, some bigger topics. There are conferences around the country where you can learn how to be an official for bocce or a guide runner, or learn how to fit someone in a racing chair. But these are kind of some of those bigger discussions like we had today related to DEI or leadership development or next generation leadership coming up the ranks. So that's coming up October. It's a little ways off, but it'll be after Tokyo Games and right before Beijing. So we'd like to think we're in a perfect position to celebrate and gear up for the Beijing Games and celebrate Tokyo. So October 20th and 21st.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to be ushered into labs and learning a little bit more about
right.
that. So thank you for that invitation, and I'll be serving as one of the members of a board to discuss more about that.
Thrilled
so thank
to have you. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Jenny Lim, Canadian Women in Sport. Talk to us a little bit about some of the resources, some of the upcoming events, but again, one to two things that you would like our audience to take away from our conversation today.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned some of these already, so I won't go into too much depth, but it's all on our website. I really encourage you to take a look. And like I said, we're always building, always iterating, always evolving. So if you have any thoughts to share, please do let us know. Something that I haven't spoken about on this list is the Same Game online toolkit. So this is something that we've designed over the last 3 years with support from Dr. Shannon Kerwin from Brock University, as well as 17 soccer and basketball clubs, because we recognize that clubs or grassroots sports organizations are often an individual's or women and girls' first experience in sport. It may also be the environment where women and girls first experience sexism and racism, sadly. And so we recognize the importance of quality, inclusive experiences at the community grassroots level. And this is a toolkit that we've made accessible for free on our website. and it sort of walks organizations through a process of embedding gender equity in your organization, not coming up with one initiative, one women and girl initiative, but actually going through the process of collecting data, consulting with your community, planning, communicating, garnering buy-in all through the process, so on and so forth, to really have it embedded into the culture of your organization. So really encourage you to check that out. And again, any feedback you may have for us, because we're always learning. 1 to 2 things that I would encourage you to take away. It isn't anything new, but maybe an extension to this theme of words to action is to never stop learning and to always be curious. I think that the more that, especially in diversity, inclusion, equity, access, the more we know, the more we don't know. And it's having the humility to know that. We learned from one of our really great partners here in Canada, when you learn something is to eat your learning. So extend, E for extend your learning. So, okay, now that you know this, how else can you extend that? Apply, reflecting on what you do day to day, and how can you apply that learning when it comes to diversity and inclusion? And then to transform. So now that you've applied, how can you actually make change? To Danielle's point, how can you make a choice to take action on a day-to-day basis? And I think that's usually where we find these conversations to be challenging is, okay, so I know this now, what can I do? But to know that, just even around the panel today and in the community, there's so much help out there. So many organizations, individuals are prepared to teach if you want to learn, and to support if you want to make change. So just to continue to be curious.
Wow. Eat, extend, apply, take action. Is that correct?
Transform.
Transform. My goodness. I mean, great acronym. I'm going to move this forward. One of the things that even struck me as a powerful statement, and again, because I do have little ones, and I think about the fact that I started when I was age 5, is saying that many of us learn about racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination as early as 4, 5, and 6, and it can stick with you. So it's very important that we sort of take that information at hand and start with the youngest age, because they're going to move through these systems and can learn some things that can really challenge them as they try to navigate this space, or even want to stay in this space to move on to be future leaders. So thank you for that information and that toolkit as well. Last and certainly not least, Danielle Slayton, thank you so much for being with us today. Again, want to take some resources from you. What information should we know about? Or is there anything upcoming or that we should sort of take a look back at? And what are 1 or 2 things that you would like to leave with our audience today?
Well, 2 organizations I love, they're near and dear to my heart. If you are in the Bay Area, it's Bay Area Women's Sports Initiative, pronounced bossy, because that's what we are.
Hey.
And, but it's after school programming for girls in underserved communities, really giving them that first introduction oftentimes to sport on their campus, because transportation often is an issue, and funding. And so in East San Jose, in San Mateo County as well. And we work with actually kids with disabilities as well. So we have our Bossy Rollers and we have our Bossy Girls, which is fantastic. So check that out. In addition, the U.S. Soccer Foundation is more of a national foundation, but really about providing access to soccer to underserved communities, often in inner cities across the U.S. And then a couple of summits that I've participated in and that are kind of exciting, I think, coming up. One is the She Believes Summit. It's in conjunction with the big soccer tournament that U.S. Soccer puts on every February. And they do a summit that's really geared towards college-age women and young professionals who are interested in getting in the sport. There's lots of speakers and panelists and stuff, so a great opportunity to learn and network. And maybe it'll be in person, maybe it'll be virtual. I don't know what that will look like going forward. So just stay tuned and check that out next February. And then upcoming, I just kind of heard about this, so I wanted to share it because it sounds kind of exciting to me. But Sports Business Journal is putting on a conference at the end of the month that's really targeted for people both inside and outside of sport on how to progressively help organizations develop human capital and build enterprises that really do consider diversity, equity, and inclusion as a part of their core being. So I just heard about it a few days ago, and I'm going to participate. It's free, so you should definitely check it out as a resource.
Can
Go
I say
ahead.
something about that? So I got an email about that this morning, and I actually emailed them back and said, I don't see any disability representation. So if anybody has a connection or somewhere inside there, and not to say that I'm the best person for that, but there's a lot of really awesome female sport leaders out there, or people that I think could contribute. So if anybody knows, let me know.
Call me, because I know somebody presenting and the person who told me about it. So we got lots to talk about, Donna.
Oh my God. Connections. I love this.
Yeah, so for sure, I think that's a good point. And again, like, to me, I think that's just such a, part of this conversation, to Jenny's point, is getting curious, right? And learning and being like, hey, now next time, you can guarantee, like, I'll be scanning through and be like, where's the diversity when we're talking about disabilities? We got something to say about it. So I'm so grateful for this conversation and continuing to open my eyes in that way. So thank you, Donna. So I guess I will just say, like, maybe I'll end with that, right? Like, just keep being open. And I have a little note on my computer, especially, I feel like I've kind of felt this over the last 10 months in particular, is like, it says, get curious, not furious. Because sometimes, like, you hear something and you just want to be like, ugh, and just, no, like, let's get curious. Let's try to understand, have this empathetic ear, and try to sit in that other person's shoes. And then let's do something about it, and let's try to progress and move forward. So get curious, not furious, and keep your eyes open for opportunities to keep growing and learning.
Curious, not furious. I see a t-shirt coming. Beth, I know it's sitting in the background, but I see a t-shirt coming for our crew and what we do. Thank you, each and every one. I want to thank all of our panelists today for sharing your voices, sharing your insight, your wisdom, sharing your joy. I know Donna's like, I'm gonna bring us down a little bit. I'm sorry, but sharing the truth, and I think that's very important, that we know those statistics, we know those realities, and we continue to move forward each in a way. And I hope that this particular platform through the Institute, our Sport Conversations for Change, to serve as one of those spaces to sort of share that truth and that voice. Dr. August, is there anything that you would like to add with respect to these amazing women and their message today?
No, I just like to thank everyone for being here and sharing your message. I've learned a ton throughout the course of the past hour and a half, and I'm really excited to kind of spread the word, talk about it more with our interns on Friday when we have meetings throughout the next week, and continue to kind of process all the rich information that you've provided, and look up some of those sources and learn more, because I think, I want to eat the information, right? Like, it's good news. So thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to talk to you all.
Love it. Love it. Again, thank you. So as we round out our day today, we just want to say, stay connected with San Jose State, stay connected with the Institute for the Study of Sports, Society, and Social Change. Please feel free to connect to either myself, Dr. August, our amazing executive assistant, Beth Doyle, and our ISSS SC team. Got to get all those S's in there at www.sjsuvordstoaction.com. We'd love to hear from you, as all have shared today. Get new insights, learn new things, eat the information, and stay curious and not furious as we move forward. So we thank each and every one of you for joining us, and we'll see you on our next Sport Conversation for Change, which will be next month, April 8th. So look for that information, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.